Hi, this is Professor Stugard, and in this video we're going to discuss the map function. So our goals for this lecture was, well, first of all, we're going to discuss the map function and what it does. And then we're also going to talk about how we use the map function with different types of data structures to get the output really that we want and that we desire. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how we have to define different arguments for our different functions in the map function. So first of all, what does the map function do? Why is it a very useful function to use in data science? And the idea is that, well, basically the map function lets us take a list or a vector or and take that list and vector and actually perform the same function or even write a formula and perform the same formula on every single element in that list or in that vector. So the map function is actually part of the purrr package, which is part of tidyverse. So if we load tidyverse, we automatically will have the map function as well. And the way we typically use the map function is we have the map function, and then our first argument inside the map function is the list or the vector that we wish to, well, perform that operation on. And then the second part, our second argument, is the function we're going to use. So the function that we apply or the formula that we apply to every element in that list or in that vector. So let's take an example here. So let's say I have a vector. It is a doubles. So we have pros average, and we have, again, 5 different values here. Each looks like rounded to 2 decimal places. And let's say I want to actually just round these to the whole numbers. I don't want decimals. I just want whole numbers. So the nice part is the map function lets us round every value in this vector in just one line. And the way we're going to actually use it is, well, the map function, then the name of our vector, pros average, comma, and then the function we want to use, which in this case is the round function. So we're going to round every element, in this case, to the nearest whole number. So when we run the code, here's the output. And so we get this output, and it's a long vertical output because what it's doing is outputting a list. So again, here's our original one, pros average. We had those 5 elements in our vector. And then our output, we can see that we outputted 5 different, well, outputs. And each one corresponds to one of the values rounded to the nearest whole number in our original vector. And we're using the indexing here too. So the output uses the indexing. So we see the 3 inside the double brackets means that that was the 3rd entry from our vector that we rounded to the nearest whole number. So again, the default output here for maps is that it's a list and it's an indexed list so that we can actually extract whatever elements we might want. However, we don't always want to output a list. Again, one of the nice parts about R is that we have, well, vectors, and we can do vectorized operations on our vectors. And in fact, the map function is a vectorized type of function. It's applying the same function to everything in our vector or our list. So the nice part is map is just kind of the base function, and then there are a whole family of map functions. And so if I want to output a numerical vector using doubles, we do map underscore DBL. And so if I run the code now, it's going to do the same exact operation. I'm going to take my pros average vector. I'm going to round everything to the nearest whole number, except now by saying map underscore double, my output is going to be a numerical vector instead of a list. And if I run the code, now it's all in one nice, neat line. So it actually stores it as a vector instead of a list. So the map family includes options for, well, again, a bunch of different types of outputs. I can output a character vector, the double vector, the integer vector, a logical vector. And then the last 3, we can output data frames as well, where our outputs are binded. And then the last one is actually the walk function. Now, we're not really going to use the walk function because it basically tells us to return nothing, make it kind of invisible. And so let's take a look at those last 3. So if we're going to map underscore data frame R, so DFR, right, data frame R, that means rows. It means what it's going to actually do is take the output, so it's going to perform whatever operation, and then it's going to add those elements to our original input as a row at the bottom. So we're actually making a data frame where we can see the input, and then the next row would be our what we actually did to the our vector or whatever our input was. Then we also have map, where we can bind it by the columns. So that's map underscore df data frame C for columns, and that is the same idea where we're going to, again, apply that map function. We're going to do the same function or formula to every element that we input, but this time it's going to output as a column at the end. And again, bind it and attach it as a data frame. And then, like I said, the last one, walk, we use that to return outputs, kind of usually if we're doing graphs and plotting stuff. We're really not going to use that much in our kind of intro to data science course. It's not something that comes up very often, but it is part of the map function family. And again, if you look at the help function for the map family, it will pop up. But again, we're not going to do that one all that often. So let's take another look at this code, because we did something a little bit different as well. Usually if I use the round function, well, it's a function, which means it has the parentheses at the end. But when I type the round function into my mapping function, I don't put the parentheses. And we have to be really careful. This is definitely a syntax thing with the map function, and we want to be very, very careful here. It's a kind of again, a common place to make a mistake, because again, typically we use the round function with our parentheses, but we're not actually doing it that way with the map function. So what we're trying to do with the map function is saying, okay, take that prose average, and we're going to pass that into the object known as round, which ends up being a function. So it has to do with the way that we name our functions and the way our functions are stored in the computer's memory. But again, we're just passing that vector. So we don't want to include the parentheses in this case. If we do include the parentheses, R is going to try to execute that function, but we're not going to actually have an argument supplied when we run that function. So let's take a quick look at what would happen. So if I try to run this code, but I include those parentheses at the end for my round function, I'm going to get an error, and it's going to say that 0 arguments were passed to round. Because, again, what really happened is that R tried to run the function map, and then it tried to separately then run the function round, not necessarily understanding that we were trying to pass that vector into the round function. So it just tried to run round at the parentheses, but the parentheses were empty. So it said, okay, round nothing. But you can't just round nothing. The computer's going to say, you tried to round nothing. And that is what that error means. There were 0 arguments passed to the round function. So we have to make sure that we do not include our parentheses at the end when we use the map function. Now, the nice part is we can actually use the pipes in conjunction with our map function, and I think this helps make the code a little bit more readable. And so I can, again, take, say, my vector, prose average, so I can take a vector, and I can actually pipe my vector into this function now. So, again, typically we were piping data frames in and using our wrangling functions on our data frames, but we can actually pipe in vectors as well, or lists, or, again, we could even pipe data frames into the map function. But when I do the piping feature now, so I can pipe it into the map function, and I want to round everything in my map function. And if I want to specify the arguments that would typically be in my round function, I actually do that separately in the map function. So again, it's kind of a lot, but we're passing it to the round function. So I want to absolutely round here, and I want to round to 1 digit. Now again, typically that would be an argument that's in the round function. So right, the round function has the parentheses, and then inside the parentheses for the round, we would say digits equal 1. Now the default is that there's no digits, we round to the nearest whole number, but now I want to round to 1 decimal place. And so to specify that, again, that goes inside my map function as its own argument, because again, the idea is that those arguments are going to get passed into the round function as well. So if I run it like this, boom, we actually get our vector, everything is rounded to 1 decimal place now, which is what we desired. So again, we would have to define that argument. We define our arguments now inside the map function. So again, there's a little bit of a learning curve here and figuring out where to put the different arguments for our different types of functions. But after a little bit of practice, hopefully it becomes a little bit easier. And again, I really love the pipe function, so I try to pipe everything because I think it just makes my code more readable. I can read it more easily myself. So that's typically what I try to do. All right, so now we're at the end. Can you answer the following questions? So what is wrong with this line of code? So I'm running the map function on employee rate, and I want to use the function label %. So again, we don't know what any of those things are, right? Employee rate could be a list, a vector, data frame, doesn't matter. We don't have to talk about it. And we're using the function label %. Again, we've never used the function label %, but it's a really nice function because it converts proportions to percentages. So you don't have to know anything about either of those to know that there's an error on this line. What is that error? Again, you don't have to know anything about what we're inputting, about employee rate. You don't have to know how the function label % works at all. You should be able to see that there's an error in that line of code the way it is written. What is it? And then secondly, how can I actually have the map function return a character vector? So a string of characters like names and stuff. What function out of the map family would I use for that? All right. Hopefully we learned something today, and as always, take care of yourselves.